Jack Stockwell, where I am offering you truth without a muzzle, for as long as it for as long as it can be. That's my plan. That's my intention. All right, there. I want to talk about Trump and Saudi with the richest men with him, and how about making Gaza U.S. territory? This is some of the discussions that are going on behind the scenes. I haven't seen it picked up in national news yet. But how would you like to see Gaza treated the same way we treat Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, other things that are considered U.S. territories? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool to fly from the United States through Schiphol down to Gaza, land in Gaza, and never have to go through customs? I'm kind of serious, because that is what Trump is talking about doing, is making Gaza U.S. territory. As he starts to close the door on his relationship with Netanyahu and all the little things behind the scenes that indicate that, sometimes you just get tired of putting up with somebody. And it's time to move on and establish further relationships with somebody else. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's program. And a couple other things. If I get time, I want to get to Planet X. Remember the days of Marshall Masters years and years ago when it was seen? And now it is seen again. And it is NASA that has seen Planet 9, Planet X. They're not calling it Nibiru, but NASA has referred to it as Planet X, out beyond Pluto, just sitting there. Now, I don't know how they determine that it's just sitting there, because something that far away can be coming straight at you and would seem like it's sitting still. So hopefully we have time today to get into that, because Planet X is back in the news. So I'm going to try to condense, I'll do a bit of an update here before I get to Gaza and the idea of turning it into a U.S. territory. They are discussing this. They are. It may sound a little silly, but it is being talked about in back channels. And to me, it's just as silly as listening to Mike Pompeo this morning on Fox News, talking about the unrelenting imperialist attitudes of Putin, and how Putin refuses to do a 30-day ceasefire when it's obvious what's going on here. So I will take a few minutes and get to that as well. But I'm going to try to condense the whole thing so that what is going on today around the world, and especially with the four biggest knuckleheads in Europe, is definitely going to affect what's going to happen tomorrow. And by that, what I mean, what happened to the four European, quote, leaders, unquote, Starmer, Macron, Merz, and Tusk, who had gone on a journey by train of all places, to Kyiv, because they don't want to be shot down, to try to sabotage any peace agreement by demanding that there should be a 30-day ceasefire before any other kind of negotiations can start. So here you have the four leaders of these nations that have had a big hand to play in the ongoing decimation of Ukraine and the continuing slaughter of the cannon fodder that Ukraine has to offer against an overpowering Russian army. And these, who's controlling them? Who's making them say these stupid things? That Putin has to be willing to agree to sit down for a 30-day ceasefire before they sit down. And Putin has said over and over again, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be any ceasefire. Are you kidding? You guys need to catch up. It's May 2025, and we won the war. Now, we'll sit down for negotiations, but there will be no perceived conditions whatsoever. We'll just tell you what our conditions are. If you can live with it, fine. If you can't, we will march on to Kyiv. And that's it. So the significance of these four people, I mean, Putin answered their demand for the 30-day ceasefire by proposing an immediate direct negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. I think day after tomorrow, this Thursday. So when the four knuckleheads were getting, the four stooges, let me say that, were getting together demanding a 30-day ceasefire from Putin. Putin is saying, no, I am demanding an immediate meeting right now between Kyiv and Moscow this Thursday, the 15th of May, without preconditions, in Istanbul, where we were negotiating this 3 years ago, and you stopped it. Now, we'll see if he really means it. I mean, was he just, you know, puffing out his chest and Tarzan yell and that kind of stuff? Because he said he's going to be, or Zelensky, excuse me, I don't mean to imply Putin. Zelensky is, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there in Istanbul, and I'm going to see Putin face to face. Well, we'll see. Because he says, I'll be there in Istanbul Thursday waiting for Putin to arrive. And of course, that was immediately, that he said that right after he had met with the Four Stooges. And the significance of this short move on the chess game is very clear. I mean, it's apparent that the whole world, that the so-called peace initiative of the Europeans was aimed at nixing the potential for a ceasefire and negotiations to end the war, and because it's very clear that the Ukrainian army is, according to all the military experts that I can gather information from, is right now very close to total collapse. And in any case, it's generally agreed that its collapse is just a question of time. Some are saying it may take till the end of June, the end of July, but the end of the Ukrainian army has arrived. And so it's obvious that the European demand for a ceasefire, at least that's the suspicion expressed by many, was aimed at this time to give the Ukrainian army time to refreshen, to give them new arms, to bring in as many foreign troops into Ukraine as possible. And so obviously Putin's not going to consent to that. So they were completely outmaneuvered by Putin. So when they say, we demand of Russia an immediate 30-day ceasefire, and Putin says, no, let's meet right now in Istanbul. I'll give you 48 hours. You get to Istanbul and we'll pick up where we left off 3 years ago. Wow. Talk about a bold move on the chessboard. And so they were, the Four Stooges were just completely outmaneuvered by Putin by making this bluff obvious. Now, it remains to be seen if Zelensky, who, as we know, has not acted as his own master whatsoever, is actually showing up Thursday in Istanbul, because he was just yesterday, come on, Putin, meet with me in Istanbul this Thursday. So the drama goes on. Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia said that he is completely shocked about this behavior of the Europeans. He says many Western countries really want this war to continue. And what do they have to do with it anyway? He says it's up to the Ukrainians and the Russians. This is their business. It's nobody else's business but the Ukrainians and the Russians. And then a more adequate response came from from Michael von der Schulenburg, who was a member of parliament of the Bundestag, who together with other members went to the military parade in Moscow, and he issued a statement of peace from the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier on the Red Square in Moscow, where he basically said, why did Germany not prevent the sabotage of peace negotiations that Russia was offering back in March of 2022? Now, Schulenburg and the others that were there with him from the German parliament have already been severely censored by the German government, that anybody in the German government or public would have the gall to go to Moscow and celebrate the 80th anniversary of the end of Nazism, which of course it wasn't the end. It was just a temporary delay in its continued spread around the planet. But Schulenburg said, from the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Kremlin, Why did Germany stop these negotiations 3 years ago? I mean, it was a brilliant opportunity. Germany completely missed it. And then he blasts the new German government for actively trying to undermine Trump's peace efforts. And when the German foreign minister declared that Russia will always be our enemy and that he regrets that the Taurus missile cannot be deployed before May, he says he feels like he's transported back to the Second World War. But he expressed at least appropriate respect by a German parliament member for these celebrations. So Trump intervened in all of this, of course, and urged Ukraine to immediately agree to the proposal for direct, unconditional talks put forward by Putin. Now, if you had been in a fight with somebody and you had thoroughly won the fight, the argument's over, the 100 witnesses say, yeah, you won the fight, and the other person is saying, well, I want you to pay all my medical costs, and I want my property restored, and I want you to back pay my salary since I was in the hospital, what would you do? When this person attacked you, this person's been attacking you for 12 years. You finally had to respond, and you put him in his place. And he got beat up. He lost the fight. Are you going to go in and just make all these reparations and say, hey, I'm sorry for defending myself? So hopefully this is going to have some kind of an impact on Zelensky, but I think that the image of Germany is becoming darker and darker with the behavior not only of what Baerbock did and what Kohl did, but also now two new members, Johann Vadaful and Merz, and I think symptomatic of the many statements by the Russian leaders that Germany's past is coming back, referring to Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany is starting to reemerge. Now, there was this discussion a few months back between Professor Glenn Deason and Dmitry Polyansky, who's Russia's first deputy ambassador to the UN, who has appeared on some of the Schiller podcasts in the past. And in discussion, Polyansky quoted Marshal Zhukov speaking to Marshal Rokossovsky in Berlin at the end of Second World War. And what Zhukov said, remember General Zhukov was in charge of the Eisenhower equivalent of the Russian army. And Zhukov said this, commenting to one of his underlings, Marshal Rokossovsky. He said, we liberated them, and they will never forgive us for that. How prophetic. Now, I only recently ran across that quote. Zhukov, in charge of the Russian army that finally won the Eastern Front, got into Germany, took them a while to get from the Polish-German border over to Berlin, but once they got there, they secured Berlin, Hitler allegedly blowing his brains out down in the bunker underneath. The others fleeing to Argentina or Paraguay or wherever the rest of them went. Operation Paperclip picking up several of the Nazis and bringing them to America. Because the Nazis not only had great engineering, and it looks like they were on the verge of anti-gravity levitation themselves, and very close to an atomic bomb. They also understood propaganda. And they understood how you can take a seemingly peaceful group of people, and I'm talking about post-World War I Germany, from about 1928 up to 1933, and turn them into savages through propaganda. Why wouldn't you want to bring them to our country? Well, something's playing at K-Talk. So Zhukov says we have liberated them, liberated the Germans from Nazi control, and they will never forgive us for that. My goodness. What did Zhukov know and understand about Nazi theory, Nazi propaganda, Nazi activity, that even though his Russian troops had liberated the German people from Nazi control, the German people would never forgive them for that. I mean, that's definitely something to look into a little deeper, because that's very strange language. And because it is a fact that the Russophobia currently of Ursula von der Leyen and of Friedrich Merz, when you look at looking at the two of these together and a bunch of other of these hawks, it's quite noteworthy, and whether they are consciously in this tradition or not, that's how the world is perceiving it. So are people regretting that there was a victory over the Nazis 80 years ago? I think that should be a topic of discussion. Well, there's still something playing at K-Talk. I think that's because that's what I'm seeing in the German leadership, that somehow they lost something that was very important to them when they lost Hitler. Now, I think it's absolutely unbelievable that Merz said in any case at the end of the war negotiation that there would have to be a war crimes tribunal for Putin. Of all the insane things to say, I mean, that is unbelievable. So Merz is pushing for a 30-day ceasefire, which Russia has already said is not going to happen. And then he says after the end of the war and things have been settled, then we need to prosecute Putin for war crimes. How insane can these people be? Now, maybe that's just what they call chutzpah. Who's got the biggest truck, to say the least? I mean, given the fact that the argument, I mean, what was the cause of the special military operation in the first place? Maybe one has to put into this tribunal those who are preparing a war of aggression, which at this point, of course, would be NATO. NATO is still trying to fight a war in the Ukraine against Russia. In any case, the language of this is just becoming unbelievable. And I think one can say that we're now on a short-term countdown, but we'll see what happens. Day after tomorrow, on the 15th, the anniversary of Israel, 1948, of the partitioning by the UN that created the two states, Israel and Palestine, but Palestine, of course, had already been there for thousands of years. And in Istanbul, where the Russians are supposed to sit down with the Ukrainians, keep the four stooges away from the place, and see what they can come up with. Because Putin has made it very clear, there will be no NATO in Ukraine. Ukraine will demilitarize. Everything that has the least connotation to the military will be removed from the Ukraine. And we're going to set up a security architecture that protects both of us. Now, this behavior by so-called leaders of the West makes it all the more interesting that Xi Jinping and Putin, in the course of their meetings on the sidelines of this 80th year anniversary of the end of World War II, basically said that Russia and China together have a very special responsibility for the world, and that they have not only a very high level of strategic and security trust among the two of them, a very far-reaching collaboration in many areas, but that cooperation is a precedent for how great nuclear powers can sit down and relate to one another. And then they say development, get this. Can you imagine this coming out of the Biden administration? That development is the key to the solution of our problems. This came out of this meeting between Putin and Xi Jinping. Development is the solution of our problems. What? Mutual interest and mutual concerns for the development of the infrastructure, of the economics, of the society, of the culture, of each country working together in union with one another. Of course, the major thrust of the U.S. State Department, I would say since 9/11, of course, has been war, 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 and more war. And if these countries who have strategic reserves that we want won't give them to us, we will go kill them and take it. And I don't have to list all the countries, you already know who they are. Because that's exactly the way it's been this whole time. And so the two come up with the idea that the new name for peace is development. It's an old saying of Pope Paul VI. The new name for peace is development. Now, interesting for sure that also the trade negotiations between the United States and China, which took over the last several days, has led to a conclusion. Did you see what was announced yesterday? Both sides characterized these negotiations as a success. Is that mutual development? Both sides said, we can live with this. The United States is reducing the tariffs for Chinese imports to 30%, and China is reducing the import of U.S. products to 10%. And it's just preliminary for 90 days. And then they'll continue the dialogue, and China said this is contributing to the stability of the world economy. Now, the next major decisive question will be what happens with Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. And I was watching clips of that this morning on the news. And if you saw it, what do you think when you saw the room that Ben Salman and President Trump walked into and sat down in those two chairs at the head of the room? Did you see what was lining multiple chairs of the other walls of that big room? The richest men in the world. Zuckerberg was there. The richest men in the world were in this room with Saudi Prince Ben Salman and President Trump. Well, think about that for a minute. Just think about what that means. Because what you've seen out of the State Department in the past has been a lineup of the biggest ass kissers in the political world of the United States. The yes men and the yes women who follow the lead of the president, and of course the president is following the lead of the deep state. And you see a coterie in these kinds of meetings of a handful of people. And here, there were dozens of the richest people on the planet meeting with Saudi Arabia. What's up? What does this mean? Because the next major decisive decision or question is what's going to happen with Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, which will also be in the next few days between now and the end of the week, where major economic and financial deals are on the agenda with these huge investments coming from both sides. Now, who would be there to marshal the huge investments of both sides except the richest people in the world? So it's kind of like wherever Trump goes outside of the United States, inside the United States, it's to the entertainment of the MAGA crowd and the rallies that he holds. But when he goes to foreign nations, it's all about money. Is that a bad thing? I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just so different than the policies and the procedures of our State Department over the last 2.5 decades. Well, actually, it goes back earlier than that. Because, I mean, it's going to be very interesting because if Trump wants to curb the influence of China and Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has made some rather interesting deals with China, because China needs Saudi Arabian oil as much as you need air and food. This is not going to be that kind of that easy a thing to step into, because while Saudi Arabia has hesitated to fully join the BRICS, although they have been dancing with BRICS, they are nevertheless listed as full members in the list in Brazil, and obviously they have major investments planned with China in nuclear energy and other things. So about all we can do is see what happens. I mean, it was mooted in the media that Trump may announce a two-state solution endorsement by him, and I'm going to get to this. I'll get to this. I think I'll probably get to it before the end of the first hour, where Trump wants to turn Gaza into a U.S. territory. Yeah, I know. When I first read that, I thought I was reading something out of the Bee. Some kind of a satire. No, it's serious. And if that happens, if Trump finally puts his foot down and says we are going to have a two-state solution, it would be a major breakthrough in what's going on there now. But obviously, the ongoing genocide is something that has to stop. Because every single day, while you were sleeping last night, more innocent people are being murdered by the IDF. Now, the German foreign minister, Vadapul, who I mentioned earlier, just went to Israel to declare his solidarity with Israel, demanding complete disarmament of Hamas, and then demanded a political solution and a two-state solution. And these people bandy around this idea of two-state solution to the point where it's kind of like, if you're going to sit down and do business with somebody, one of the first things you do is you give them your business card. This is who I am here. You know, it's got all the contact information. This is who I am and what. Because if you don't sit down and talk about the two-state solution, whether you mean it or not, it's the same as sitting down in a meeting and giving them your business card. But in any case, it's so mealy-mouthed, to say the least. We commit our solidarity to Israel, the German foreign minister. So President Herzog is right now in Germany, the president of Israel. You know, they have a president besides the prime minister. The president probably has less power in Israel's government than the vice president has in the United States government. But nonetheless, he's in Germany. He met with President Steinmeier on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between Germany and Israel. And so we're going to have to see. There's not a lot of pressure from Germany on Israel that I've been able to pick up in the press to stop these atrocities, at least not in any meaningful way. And then contrary to that, there is a statement by the German historian, Dr. Arthur Lazo, L-A-Z-O, who says that the extreme inhuman behavior of the Soviet soldiers when they took over parts of Germany in 1945 has forever shaped his understanding of what Russia is all about, naturally in a positive way. Remember some of the comments of the German citizens after the Red Army arrived? They were praying for the Nazis to come back. Well, the Red Army, and armies have a way of doing this, like the My Lai massacre that the U.S. Army did, of getting back at people who struck a fatal blow against you. And because of the 27 million dead Russian people conquering the Nazi war machine, they felt that some payback was necessary. Now, I certainly don't endorse that whatsoever. But now, That's the discussion that's going on in Germany. The other major conflict, India and Pakistan, seems to have cooled down a little bit. Trump already went quickly to claim that this was his success. Look what I've done, look what I've done. This, however, was questioned by the former foreign minister of India, who says the Western media have distorted and inaccurately have painted a one-sided picture of what is really going on between India and Pakistan, but despite the fact that Pakistan's ties to terrorism is fairly well known, and I'm going to talk about that probably in the second hour, that they don't hesitate to take the side of Pakistan. Whatever, it's good that this conflict seems to have cooled down when you have two nuclear nations aiming their missiles at each other. Because of the prevailing westerly winds in that area of the world, nuclear fallout, there'd be some in Pakistan, of course, but most of it would blow over the Himalayas and over northern India, into Bangladesh, into Southeast Asia. That would not be a good thing. So on Israel, I should have mentioned that according to some unnamed Israeli officials, they say if there's no agreement by the end of Trump's visit to the Middle East this weekend, Israel is going to launch a ground operation, and it'll take several weeks until the next exit point is achieved. So there you are. We're still on a very short fuse, and the deadline. Will the Trump visit turn the tables? And that means we have to keep pushing forward for this Egyptian plan that they want to bring to pass here quickly for the Gaza to include the Oasis plan. And that is going to be the two-state solution, with hopefully the inclusion of the Oasis plan, is going to be discussed in the United Nations June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, just a month from now. So on other topics, this immigration thing, if you followed the history of open border immigration in Europe, and then of course during Biden, well, not just Biden, go back to Bush Jr., and then through Obama, and then through Trump, although he tried to curb it somewhat in his first administration. What you see happening here, and it's harder to see here with a population of 320 million people, with 20 million sneaking in over the border, less than 10%. Well, not sneaking. Not sneaking any more than a July 4th parade down State Street in Salt Lake would be sneaking. The same thing's been going on in Europe for a long time. And I've given this example before. I have been to London, I think, 4 times now, Paris twice, and Marseille. My favorite place so far in France, if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about, is the southern part of France, especially on the Mediterranean coast. Just like my favorite part of Spain is in the western, or the eastern areas that border the Mediterranean. Just beautiful, beautiful weather, beautiful people. And when I was in Rome, crossing from downtown Rome across the Tiber to St. Peter's, there were massive amounts of immigrants from Gabon, I can't think of the other big one, selling their stuff on the bridge over the Tiber. And purses, knockoffs of well-known jewelry and watches and purses and everything else, and you don't know whether it was real or not. But I never saw that in Spain, but I saw it in France, I saw it in England, I saw it in Italy. Italy has stopped the immigration here 2 or 3 years ago, but it's still going on to some degree in England and in France. And England now, about half a dozen of the major cities in England now have Islamic mayors. So what, you say? Well, it's an indication of their opening their borders and what has showed up. Same thing is going on in Canada. I don't know if Canada's slowed down their immigration or not, but when I was up there for 2 years on an LDS mission, 69 to 71, it was just picking up because large ships, merchant marine ships, of people coming from India, coming from Pakistan, coming from Bangladesh, were coming down the St. Lawrence Seaway into Toronto. And I'm not making any comment about that except I'm observing what was taking place. Now, when I was in Spain, I didn't see this. Two things surprised, and I've talked about this before. I was there last September for my son's wedding. Two things that I found amazing. The only fat people were American tourists, and there were hardly any African Americans. There were African Americans, but hardly any. I think there were more American tourists than there were African Americans. And I asked my son about this. And he said, well, Dad, they have very strict immigration laws in Spain. Spain doesn't want the same thing to happen there that's happened to France and England and Italy. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is that MERS and, I forget the names of some other powerful, Germany is trying to change their immigration laws now because Germany has been inundated with Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, same as these other countries, to the point where it begins to be a tremendous social problem because even though there's a Christian faction in some of these, the most of them are Islamic. Now, can Islamic people live in peace next to Christians? Yeah, it's been going on in Jerusalem for a long time. It was going on in the West Bank for a long, hundreds of years of peace until the Brits got involved at the end of World War I. And so Germany, the leadership in Germany, I kind of went way out in the weeds with this one. The leadership of Germany is trying to secure their borders now because they are trying to deny anybody at the border to enter now. But that's not going to function because it creates massive tensions with most of these neighbors, and the police have already said that an additional 3,000 police in Germany have been deployed to the borders, but are not far. Germany's a big country, and Germany has, I think, 80-some million people. It's not a country that you can just start putting Trump walls up around the border of the country. So even worse, I don't know if I can say worse, equally as bad is the behavior of the United States and the Trump administration on the migrant issue, where they now have a great plan to send illegal migrants to Libya. You've probably seen this in the news. A state which is a completely failed state since the 2011 NATO intervention. Thank you, Hillary. And it has reached an infamous notoriety ever since for the brutal behavior that's going on toward the migrants there. So in what Pope Francis referred to these immigrant camps in Libya as concentration camps. The same thing that Gaza has been referred to a number of times. So it seems to be a part of the U.S. deportation plan to make it look so horrible that migrants won't even think of coming to the United States for fear of being deported to these camps in Libya. That's actually being discussed. I haven't seen that on national news yet. Okay, there's a very important article, I'm just going to mention it without going into details, by Dr. Bittner, Bittner, an author in Germany, who also had participated in Schiller conferences in the past, who makes a very drastic criticism of the new coalition treaty of the new German government. He says it's moving in the direction, the new German government, Merz and company that got in there. And remember Merz's background. He was just like Carney in Canada, one of the most prominent world bankers. You had the same thing with Merz in Germany as one of the most prominent leaders and policymakers of BlackRock. And when you get these people together, it's kind of interesting what kind of population control methods they come up with. So this Dr. Bittner, an author in Germany, is writing about Germany moving in the direction of an Orwellian surveillance state, demanding biometric remote identification of everybody. And he ends the article by criticizing the Ukraine policy of its new government by saying they should not forget that Germany never overcame the status of being an enemy state, according to the new UN Charter, for all the war parties in the Second World War, including Russia. So de facto, the war clause is still in effect, which obviously makes a potential escalation very easy in respect, if there are more provocations like the Taurus missile making it to the Ukraine and things like that. And then I think kind of the last thing I want to mention, I do still think that Pope Leo, by making the war issue the very first topic of his speeches, the ones that he's given so far anyway, and I haven't read them in its entirety, but I have briefed them, and it has appealed to the major leaders of the world in saying we are already in a fragmented Third World War, and that therefore peace is the most important. He did mention a just and lasting peace, and some people want to interpret that he is using the formulations of the West in respect to the Ukraine. But if you look at the overall profile, and the latest stuff he's come out with mentions all the woke issues. He's talking about how the woke issues are contrary to the gospel, from homosexual lifestyles, alternative families, same-sex partners, gender creation, I think is what he referred to it as, where a man creates a female gender in his body and vice versa. And he says they're all anti-biblical. The leader of 1.5 billion Christians on the planet, well over 1 billion Catholics, and he's telling them this woke stuff is against God. So I think the Pope is definitely a fresh breath of air. No, a breath of fresh air. But we'll see how long this is going to be transmitted to the different Catholic organizations throughout the world, because there are Catholic organizations who, while they are still Catholic, are not necessarily in favor or follow papal dictates. But we'll see. So this is here in 50 minutes now, kind of a short version of a very complex strategic picture. And I just want you to, I mean, my heart is full of hope. And I'm not being happy-go-lucky here or prematurely euphoric or any of those things, but when you look at the forces for good and how they're moving, emphatically the BRICS, the Global South, the leadership that's being provided by Xi Jinping and Putin and Lula, and what Xi Jinping always calls the trend of the time. Now, regardless of how you feel about Lula's political positions in Brazil and the election and all that kind of stuff, the Brazilian lifestyle is one of the best it's ever been in its history. And Brazil, of course, is one of the original BRICS countries. And Brazil is huge. You know that without Alaska, Brazil would be bigger than the United States. And it has a tremendous economy. And it's pushing further and further to a world economy through BRICS, which I still hold out great hope for. That people on the one half are still warmongering, and on the other half, through the global south, global majority, and BRICS, they're coming together and sitting down and saying, what can I do to help you? Because this is what we would like from you to help us. Now, how do we put this in stone and get co-development going between us? You've got nuclear energy, we've got tons of oil. You have a source of heritage seeds, and we've got tons of cotton. What can we do between us? Because we've got more of what we need, and you have more of what you need, but we both need the other. That's one way of dealing with each other. Another way of dealing with each other is to shoot and kill and then take what they have, which is kind of U.S. foreign policy for several decades now. It was going on before I was born. So I think there is a large historic wave going on in the direction of a new paradigm of peaceful cooperation among nations to their mutual benefit. And I would really urge that we don't go in the same direction as Germany. Germany is becoming so pessimistic. The government is bad. The new government is worse than the old government. And this has some of the telltale signs: shutting down part of its productive economy to make bullets and rockets and tanks. Closing down some aspects of the social order of the country in being one of the prime pillars of European history to becoming a war nation, getting ready for war with Russia in 2029. And I think it's really important to try to fight that impulse, but I see that here in our country. War seems to be in our blood as well, especially among those who've never had a bullet shot at them in a warlike scenario. You look at how many leaders of our government weren't in Vietnam. They weren't in Iraq. They weren't in Afghanistan. I don't even know if which end of the rifle the bullet comes out. I don't even know if they know that. But unfortunately, Germany right now is the victim of many waves of counter-organizing and brainwashing. They still have to deal with the Frankfurt School, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the 68ers, the Club of Rome, the ecology movements, the Greens. All that stuff is still blustering inside of Germany. And the long march through the institutions of the Maoists, of the 68ers, reaching high positions in government, and then influencing each other with the oligarchy for the green ideology, the green mental shaping. This isn't the reality that I would urge people to absolutely attack that kind of thinking, ruthlessly, first in yourself, or the impact of thinking in yourself, and then the insight of how it affects you to become more polemical in fighting the outside. Because I'm absolutely certain that the chances that mankind can come out of this is much, much higher than the opposite. And that is obviously, right now, the ship of mankind is not floating in secure waters. But if you look at the trend, I think the overwhelming tendency goes in the direction that this can be won, that world peace can be established. So if you look at the developments, the efforts to get peace with Ukraine, to have a settlement, hopefully on the horizon in the Middle East, to look at the BRICS dynamic overall, and then if we add what I think are extremely hopeful signs from the new Pope, who may have said certain things in the past which were not totally informed, but then he was an American. Give him a break. But I think this overall anti-liberal stance that he's taking, because the liberalism is what is the primary dynamic behind the war drive. So if he's attacking the liberal paradigm and is intending on making peace the #1 issue, I mean, it creates an enormous leeway to work on. So I think this can all be overcome, and I think the Spirit should go into your heart, your family's heart, your neighbors' hearts, your church members' hearts, your office co-workers' hearts, that we replace any fear of the current events in the planet with the hopeful belief that peace is possible in our time. Who said that? Kind of a cliche thing anymore, but very much the truth. Well, what I thought was going to be a 30-minute update has gone on a little longer than that. I want to get into the Times of London. I don't. Maybe this can go to the next section. The next section I want to talk about is the idea of wiping Gaza off this false flag against the people of Palestine. I want to get to that. But the Times of London reports yesterday that a leaked defense deal warns that Europe faces the greatest threat in a generation from Russia as it pledges closer cooperation on military matters with the European Union. And the impact essentially is to scrap Brexit, the split between the UK and the EU, while the focus and the stated intention is to prepare for joint military operations to confront Russia. And this is from the Times of London, quoting here. The UK and the EU will unveil a defense and security pact next week as part of a wide-ranging deal that will bring Britain into the closest alignment it has had with the EU since Brexit. The security impact says that the EU and UK face a decisive moment and the greatest threat in the generation because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and campaign of espionage and sabotage in the West. It says the seriousness of the challenge requires a unique and ambitious new agreement on security. Their K-Talk just took over. And they point to the threat from Trump as another cause, because it provides a mechanism joint working if the U.S. is refused to allow action under NATO's auspices. This is just insane. And the Times adds that the pact will be the centerpiece of a summit in London this month that will open the way for the UK to restart selling food and agricultural products in the EU without custom checks. Oh, well. Now, the new German foreign minister, who is, I think, in Israel right now, is pushing for the Palestine-Israel two-state solution. He says this: "We firmly believe that the prospect of a two-state solution, as remote as it seems today, is the best chance for peace and security for Israel and its neighbors. It must not be obstructed." Then he signals support for an Arab plan that envisages a role for the Palestinian Authority under its president Mahmoud Abbas in the post-war order in the Gaza Strip. And Israel's genocidal war in Gaza is rejected by a vast majority of Germans. Only 18% of the current German population thinks that Israel actions are right, and 60% no longer want Germany to supply weapons of war to Israel. Now, can you see the same thing happening here? I mean, is it possible that the same thing could happen here? I don't know. I don't know what the percentage of Americans who support the genocide. All right, let's see if I got a couple more things here. Oh yeah, this should take us through the news here. Netanyahu is submitting to Witkoff on negotiations only if the IDF is allowed to keep on killing. So in negotiations that excluded Israel, Hamas agreed with the U.S. to release the last remaining U.S. hostage, Eden Alexander. You heard about that as a goodwill gesture. And Alexander was released at noon yesterday, I think, and local time. And Hamas said that the gesture is part of the efforts to reach a ceasefire. So the Associated Press reported a senior Hamas official saying that they had been advised to give a gift to President Trump. In return, he will give back a better one. Is that a part of the art of the deal? You want to do business with somebody? Do you give them a gift in the idea that they're going to give you back a better one? So Trump said that Alexander's release was part of a larger effort to end the war and return all the hostages, as officials spoke of a window of opportunity for a larger deal. So yesterday, Al Jazeera and Reuters was reporting, citing a Palestinian Arab source, that there were direct talks between Trump administration and Hamas regarding a ceasefire and the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Now think about this. There were direct talks between the Trump administration and Hamas. And who wasn't there? What's going on here? This is, I was convinced at the outset that when President Trump and his campaign promises to end the wars, he was serious, to end the senseless killing. And then because of the power of the Israeli lobby and all the entangling tentacles, and the fact that almost every, except Thomas Mackey's from Tennessee, almost every office of a congressman or a senator in Washington has a member or representative of the Israeli lobby in their office. Yeah, this has been substantiated many times to make sure that there's no scuttle going on behind the scenes that would jeopardize the billions that we're giving Israel all the time. Because if we don't continue to give them billions, where are they going to get the money to come back over here and buy our Congress? So what's happening here is that you have the Trump administration and the Hamas people sitting down talking about a ceasefire and the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza without Netanyahu present. So yesterday, President's envoy, Steve Witkoff, along with U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, finally met with Netanyahu on the matter of returning the Witkoff framework, getting back to the Witkoff framework. But not until after the Trump administration had met with Hamas, because Hamas will not meet with Netanyahu until Netanyahu stops the genocide. Which is interesting because the genocide that Hamas is pointing at Netanyahu for doing can't be done without you and me and our tax dollars supporting the genocide. You see how that works? So previously, Netanyahu had interrupted these kinds of negotiations with a decision to blackmail Gaza with starvation. And then Witkoff has been trying to free about half of the remaining hostages in exchange for a temporary ceasefire of some 40 days with food and aid being allowed into Gaza. And that effort was after Netanyahu had walked away from a January arrangement to negotiate for the full end of the fighting. So Witkoff had told hostage families, according to the report yesterday that came out of Israel's Channel 12, we want to bring the hostages home, but Israel is not willing to end the war. Israel is prolonging it. So the present pattern has been to starve Gaza for months at a time, trade hostages for a few weeks of aid, and then resume the starvation and the killing. That's what's gone on now for a year and a half. So Netanyahu's office yesterday announced the hostage release framework that was presented by Witkoff. And those of you listening on K-Talk, we're back. I've just been talking to my streamers, and you can go to facebook.com/Global Affairs Unfiltered, and you can see what's going on the stream. And there won't be interruptions that occur at K-Talk. And I've been talking about how the Trump administration has been meeting with Hamas outside of Netanyahu's control to try to get the hostages released and then return humanitarian aid to Gaza. Then the next day, Netanyahu sits down in the meeting after the other two had their meetings. And so Netanyahu's, I should just say Bibi's office stated that they discussed the recent efforts to implement the hostage release framework presented by Witkoff ahead of the IDF's potential expanded ground campaign in Gaza, which I was also talking about, is that if some kind of negotiations that are going on with the Arab League and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and United Arab Emirates and President Trump and all of his super rich buddies with him that are over there right now don't come up with something significant, the IDF, under control of Netanyahu, has said, we're going back in and we're just going to clean them out. No wonder there is fewer and fewer members of the Israeli population that's in support of this any longer, because a lot of the truth as to what has happened, what has occurred regarding the ongoing genocide is becoming more and more apparent to the Israeli citizens. So after the three talked, Netanyahu spoke by phone with Trump, and Netanyahu's office released what can only be considered a very nasty statement. He said this: the United States has notified Israel of Hamas's intentions to release the soldier Eden Alexander as a gesture to the Americans without any compensation or conditions. And then it added that the U.S. told Israel that this move is expected to lead to negotiations to release hostages under Witkoff's original framework, which Israel has accepted. Israel is preparing for the possibility that this will not happen. So per Israel's policy, negotiations are going to be held under fire with a full dedication to reaching all the goals of the war. That's Netanyahu's office. What are the goals of the war? Well, one of the said goals, of course, is the return of all the hostages, probably a good portion of which aren't even alive anymore. But that's just the battle cry. The real goal of this is the elimination of the Palestinian people in one way or another. And because other countries wouldn't take the Palestinians, about the only thing that's left to do is starve them. So Bibi, made it clear that their planned offensive is to grab all of Gaza, which would still go ahead if the terror group didn't release more captives. So otherwise, CNN quoted a familiar source with the indirect talks between the U.S. and Hamas, saying this: we're going to go into immediate peace deal negotiations. Now that's the Trump administration meeting with Hamas before they included Netanyahu. We're going to go into immediate peace deal negotiations. Who's wagging what tail here? Who's in charge here? Now there's talk out there that Trump is absolutely tired of Netanyahu and doesn't want anything more to do with him. Is this the way he's going to get rid of Netanyahu? Because unless I am really wrong on this, Trump doesn't see, not Israel, Netanyahu. Trump does not see Netanyahu as a viable player in the Middle East politics any longer. So Israel's public broadcaster reported that Saudi Arabia, where Trump is now, hopes to get Trump's support for a regional package that includes forming a demilitarized Palestinian state, ending the war in Gaza, dismantling Hamas, and normalizing ties between Israel and Arab countries. And they said that an unnamed official in the Saudi royal family is saying there is much optimism on this, and that this is something that Israel must not miss the opportunity. All right, I think I'm going to go to the wonderful idea of making Gaza an American territory. I know that sounds crazy. In early February, barely 2 weeks after his inauguration, if you remember, and being K-Talk listeners and listeners to Global Affairs Unfiltered, and I think I've been doing this for a couple of months now, and in 2 weeks, my webmaster will be here. And we're going to be setting up the green screen, and we're going to be working with being able to bring in guests. And that's the problem, because when I bring on guests on my stream, because of the feedback, we tried this once before with Harley. The feedback made it impossible to broadcast simultaneously at K-Talk. So until that problem is fixed, I may have to bring, and I've got a lot of guests that I want to bring on my show. I may have to do those as separate recordings on the stream that you can go back and listen to later. But in February, as I said, barely 2 weeks after his inauguration, President Trump intimated that Gaza would become a U.S. territory with a view to developing the luxury real estate project with mansions, luxury apartments, hotels, casinos. And how many years would it take to remove all the rubble? And if you've seen any of the videos, there's a lot of rubble. If you think the mess left behind from the 2 recent hurricanes over the last 2 years in the southeast of America was a mess. While some of these people, especially in Asheville, North Carolina, feel like they got hit with 2,000-pound bombs like Gaza does on their civilian population. Just the pictures of Gaza today, what a mess. So how many years would it take then to get all that rubble out of there and rebuild hotels, luxury apartments, mansions, casinos? So under Trump's advisory, the Palestinians would be relocated and excluded from their homeland. This hasn't been discussed too much lately, but that's what they were talking about. Trump said, I would like Egypt to take people. He says, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean the whole thing out and say, it's over. And then Trump tells the king of Jordan, I would like for you to take some because I'm looking at the whole Gaza Strip right now and it's a mess. It's a real mess. Now, with that having been said a few months ago, and Trump is now meeting with the Crown Prince, with the richest men in the world, the richest Americans in the world, present, as I was describing in the first hour of the show, the things they were showing on TV this morning, the news coverage of him meeting with the royal family, and the number of people in that room, and some of the faces you might recognize, some you might not, because previously when you have dignitaries getting together and meeting like this, they're sitting there in 2 chairs trying to put on a face that they can literally, for the next few minutes, tolerate the presence of the other one. And then there'll be a few pictures sometimes of a half a dozen of their entourage traveling with them. In this picture, to repeat myself for the first hour, there were dozens of people in chairs lining the walls that surrounded this big, big room of the richest Americans. What are they doing there? On holiday? So when you think of what's coming with Gaza, and you think of what's coming with the Arab deal, and you think of what's coming with Trump, in my opinion, slowly pushing Netanyahu out of the room, I think this multi-billion dollar real estate project might actually be carried out. Not with the willing concession and agreement of 1.5 million Palestinians by any means. But there's this unspoken objective, which is barely mentioned by the mainstream media. I've been looking for it. I haven't seen it. It was outlined back in December of 30th, 2013. There was an article, and it said this, and this should bring a certain memory to you, because we've talked about this several times. This was written by Felicity Arbuthnot in an article in an op-ed, December 30, 2013. Was that 12 years ago? Israel is set to become a major exporter of gas and some oil if all goes to plan. Israel is set to become a major exporter of oil and gas if all goes to plan. Now, Arbuthnot was referring to the ownership of Gaza's maritime natural gas reserves, which belong to who? There's your trivia question of the morning. Who owns the onshore and offshore natural gas reserves? Yes, Palestine. And at the time of that writing, when this article was put together, Netanyahu government is planning to appropriate these maritime gas reserves, and what this signifies is that Israel is intent upon annexing Gaza, as well as their intent to destroy an entire country called Palestine. And the maritime gas reserves belong to Palestine. Israel's war against Gaza started there, October 7th, 2023, with the outright theft of Palestine's maritime natural gas reserves, which are a part of the Levants. And you know the Levant is that whole chain of countries on the eastern Mediterranean. The Levant's vast maritime corridor of natural gas reserves, onshore and offshore of the eastern Mediterranean. Now, all things, as I was trying to imply towards the end of the last hour and the beginning of this hour, all things are not going well for Netanyahu. Washington's intent, and by that I mean President Trump, I think it's his intent to get rid of Eretz Israel thinking, the Greater Israel project. Because that will not fit into him and all these rich American businessmen who are in Saudi right now, putting these deals together. It's not in their best interest that Israel maintains control of these natural gas fields that belong to Palestine, that Israel stole. And I think there is a growing confrontation. I think there's a growing confrontation between Netanyahu and Trump behind closed doors so far. There's some indication that I mentioned in the first hour that Trump may just be flat out done with Netanyahu because of his attitude. So Washington's unspoken intent that 2 weeks after the inauguration, Trump hinted at, was to transform Gaza into an American territory to prevent the Netanyahu government from appropriating Gaza's maritime gas fields. And the management of this is already underway with the auspices of Israel's Ministry of Energy. So there are secret negotiations, not too secret because I found out about it, currently unfolding that was reported a week ago in Reuters regarding the creation of a U.S.-led administration. That's what they're calling it. They're calling it a U.S.-led administration. What does that mean? Is there a U.S.-led administration in Puerto Rico? Is there a U.S.-led administration in the U.S. Virgin Islands? Is there a U.S.-led administration in Guam? So here's where you need to understand the verbiage of the day. When they say U.S.-led administration, they mean an American territory. And so when Reuters a week ago was reporting that the secret negotiations that are going on now inside the Trump administration is to create a U.S.-led administration. So who does that mean is not leading it? Who is left out of that? Yeah, Israel is left out of that. You're not going to have Israel. You could have a U.S.-Israel administration, but if you have a U.S.-led administration, Israel's not in there. So I'm quoting from Reuters a week ago. The high-level consultations have centered around a transitional government headed by a U.S. official that would oversee Gaza until it had been demilitarized and stabilized. There would be no fixed timeline for how long such a U.S.-led administration would last, which would depend on the situation on the ground. What's another way of saying that? What's another way of saying there would be no fixed timeline for how long such a U.S.-led administration would last? They're going to be there, and they're not going to leave, any more than the U.S. is going to leave Puerto Rico. Now, the U.S. foreign policy is eventually going to overshadow the so-called Greater Israel Project, Eretz Israel. They would go from what the lower part of the Egypt, I think into Ethiopia, parts of Ethiopia, all the way up through Syria, Iraq, almost to the border of Iran. And the Euphrates, and all the stuff that biblically was considered ancient Israel. So you can expect there's going to be a shift in the Zionist narrative because Netanyahu is a proxy of Trump and the rich Americans. So is regime change in Israel comprehended? Because there has to be a regime change for this to take place. And while Israel has invaded part of Syria's southern territories, the U.S., and remember this, these things don't happen spontaneously. These kinds of events were on the drawing boards weeks, months, years before. And then all the little contingencies that have to take place for major movements to occur have been in the planning stages for some time. I forget the fellow who said it. I stole it from him, and so I've used it many times on my radio show in the past. No matter how bad you think things are, it's 10 times worse. And the people who get into these positions have been bought and sold 10 times over. So they're not there representing the U.S. Constitution. They're there representing the revenue centers of our country or the other countries that might be involved. And what are the revenue centers? The hedge funds. And who's running the hedge funds? BlackRock, Jamie Dimon, Frederick Merz in Europe. These people don't end up as prime ministers or presidents of various countries because they're chip off the old block of John F. Kennedy and his ideal for world peace. They're there because money put them there in order to preserve the money. So while Israel has been busy invading and ethnically cleansing the Alawites and the Christians in Syria, moving towards Lebanon, the U.S. project consists in transforming Gaza slowly by slowly, step by step, into a U.S. territory under U.S. laws. That's kind of the definition of being a territory of another country. They rule and reign. You might have your local elections, you have your local leaders, of course, who are lackeys of the greater power, the U.S. State Department. Why? To make sure they have control of the funds. So this project would be part of a broader U.S. agenda which consists in the militarization of the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline, naming the Levant, that extends from the Egypt-Gaza border to the northern tip of Syria. Why would they want to militarize this? To protect their gas exploration, mining, extraction, and the shipping of liquid petroleum, gas, and oil as a new member of the marketplace. Whenever you try to figure out and you open up the brilliance of your own mind in quiet contemplation of what you think is going on, please do the thing that I do. First and foremost, who stands to gain? Because that's hardly ever mentioned in the headlines. Who stands to gain? Who's investing? What kind of money is involved before you ever start talking about the personalities? And the personalities that won't go along with the new plan, like Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and several others that I can mention, have to be eliminated. And then the worst horrible stories are created to make them sound like the monsters they were at the time of their death in order to satisfy the bloodthirsty nature of the members of the Western nations whose primary orientation is to win at all costs. So Israel's Ministry of Energy has awarded licenses to 6 Israeli and international companies to explore for natural gas in areas that are considered Palestinian maritime areas under international law. just imagine you living down in San Pete County on 150 acres, of which 120 of those acres is just prime farmland. Maybe all you're doing is 3 cuttings of alfalfa a year, shipping high-grade, high-protein alfalfa off to the racetracks of Southern California for premium dollars. And one day, as you're getting up and getting ready to go out and do the second cutting sometime in July or August, and all these trucks are moving in on your territory, on your property. And they said, well, we think there's oil underneath your property. Well, what the hell are you doing here? Get off my property. Oh, no, the state of Utah has given us a license to extract oil from your property. Would you go back into the farmhouse looking for your shotgun? I mean, what would you do? That's if you had a shotgun. See, the Gazans don't have a shotgun. They have empty bellies and dry mouths and starving children. So The announcement. Now, this announcement that 6 Israeli and international companies that were not named, Standard Oil, I don't know, it wasn't named, being awarded permission to explore for natural gas in the areas that are considered Palestinian maritime areas. That announcement came out 3 weeks after October 7th, 2023, with the beginning of this war. I remember talking about that back then. What is this really about? And as more and more information came to the surface, published by Israeli newspapers, Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post, that half of the people who were killed in that terrible day were killed by the Israeli army under the Hannibal Doctrine, which Western press still hasn't picked up. It just begins to be more and more obvious all the time what's going on. Now, the administrative arm of the America's growing control of the Levant military corridor is this gigantic American embassy in Beirut, in a country of less than 6 million people. This embassy in Beirut is 10 times bigger than the one in London. It's the second largest American embassy worldwide after the one in Baghdad, which of course served to administer America's unspoken colonial project in Iraq that the Western press still doesn't pick up news about, what we're stealing from Iraq. Why in a country of 6 million people would the U.S. build the second largest embassy right there practically on the Mediterranean coast, inside the Levant, inside the area that's being explored for natural gas pockets? Why would Trump right now, this minute, be in Saudi with some of the richest men in America? Maybe it was time for a little getaway. So the cost of building this embassy, the world's largest in Iraq, in Baghdad, was $750 million. Now, recorded in early 2024, a little over a year ago, the current events regarding Gaza's maritime gas reserves and the exploration that's going on. And you can Google the maps. Israel's petroleum zones intrude on maritime areas claimed by Palestine. These are the things that you can Google. You can see these maps, because back in July of 2023, the Israeli Ministry of Energy had already opened bidding for the exploration of maritime natural gas in Gaza. This was before the war broke out. Israel's Ministry of Energy is opening the bidding, here's the money, for the exploration of maritime gas and natural gas in Gaza that belongs to the Palestinians. Then 3 weeks after October 7th, the ministry announced that granting licenses to both Israel and international companies to now go ahead and explore for maritime gas reserves. Then October 29th, and I remember this because that's my birthday and what I was talking about, the ministry on behalf of the Israeli government announced the winning bidders. The two companies included ENI SPA out of Italy and the Dana Petroleum Company, which is a UK-based subsidiary of the South Korean National Petroleum Company, and the Ratio Petroleum Company, an Israeli company. Now, this is from the Israeli press. Israel awarded gas exploration licenses for Zone G, a maritime area adjacent to the shores of Gaza, Notably, 62% of Zone G falls within the maritime boundaries declared by the State of Palestine in 2019, in accordance with provisions of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, of which Palestine is a signatory. Well, my reason for bringing this up is that when Trump comes out 3 weeks after the inauguration and talks about making Gaza a territory of the United States, he wasn't just saying that like America should own the moon, America should be the first country on the surface of Mars. He's saying this because that's the art of the deal. You come out with these shocking statements when behind the scenes you have this great financial orchestration taking place that by the time the dust settles from some outrageous statements, like we're going to move 1.5 million Palestinians out of Palestine. We're going to give half of them to Egypt and half of them to Jordan. We, as though we have the authority to do something like this. Those things so shock common sense and reason that you have this psychic blow hit you. This is all part of propaganda and programming. So by the time the dust settles a little bit from what the hell does he think he's doing, he's already done it behind the scenes. The maps are already there showing these companies and others where they are allowed to go offshore from Gaza. Some of it is in Israeli territory, but a lot of it is Palestinian territory, to start mining for gas. I don't know if the art of the deal clearly, I never read the book. Maybe I should. Maybe I'd be a better businessman. But the illegal ownership of Gaza's maritime gas reserves by the State of Israel is in blatant contradiction with Donald Trump's recently announced plan to transform Gaza into a U.S. territory. Is Israel trying to do this stuff ahead of time to stop the U.S. from annexing Gaza as a U.S. territory? Or is Trump trying to bypass the Israeli government by where would Israel be without our help? What kind of leverage power does Trump have over Israel, Netanyahu, the Knesset, and Smotrich, and all the rest of them that should be in their own concentration camp? What kind of leverage does Trump have? He has all the leverage because of all the money we give to them that they would be in serious trouble if they didn't have. So if Trump's project of a U.S. territory were to be carried out, Gaza's maritime offshore gas reserve, worth billions of dollars, would not be managed by Israel. They would be brought under the jurisdiction of the U.S. government and a status similar to America's 14 territories. I only mentioned a few. I didn't mention America and Samoa. But you know Guam, you know the U.S. Virgins. And so what is at stake is a colonial-style theft in derogation of international law, because the negotiations with the oil and gas companies would be under the jurisdiction of a U.S. territory in liaison with Washington. Territories are areas that belong to and are governed by its parent country. And territories of the United States are subnational administrative divisions and dependent territories overseen by the federal government of the United States. And I think what should also be understood is that the Gaza maritime gas reserves are part of a broader coastal maritime area of natural gas extending from the Egyptian border to northern Syria. It's not just that little piece off of the Gazan strip that belongs to the Palestinians. It's just, I could go into this further. I think I've done enough because there's something I absolutely have to share with you in the remaining time of the program today. But before I do that, a commercial for Jack's Packs. There's, you know, if you're having problems with allergies, you don't need shots. You just need to suppress the overactive aspect of your nervous system that are sensitive to these allergens naturally without drugs. That's Jack's Packs on allergies. I haven't had problems with allergies for years now. But there was a time, every spring, I would just go absolutely nuts with itchy eyes, itchy, watery eyes, sinus drainage for 6 to 8 weeks. And then suddenly, it'd be over with. I never bothered to find out what was triggering that response. But ever since I started my own treatment, using about 4 different supplements, while a lot of my patients come in sneezing and sniffling and, do you have something for sinuses? Yeah, I've had it for years. It's Jack's Pack for allergies. I guarantee you, in 36 hours it'll be over with. Then there's also the cold flu. Now the summer colds are starting to show up. It's not even summer yet. How to suppress an oncoming cold in 48 hours. Using natural methods. Several supplements involved. Jack's Pack, for the immune pack. Then there is the digestive problem. There are people who, no matter what they eat, feel a little nausea, a little upset, a little bloating, gas on almost anything they eat. Sometimes, if it's nothing more than fruit. Two patients yesterday, I sent out of there with a digestive pack. And then there are those who, for whatever, are not getting, at least as far as I'm concerned, enough sunlight, or having emotional imbalances. Men with explosive temper, and women who, the female of our species, that just can't settle down emotionally. We have Jack's Pack for emotional balance. I forget what it's called, but that's what it's about. Jack's Pack for emotional balancing. Working wonderfully for women within 7 to 10 days, guaranteed. Coming back home to the earth and settling down. Because of, and all of these are because of our dietary choices. Not because of genes, because we just aren't getting the essential nutrients our bodies need to carry out the proper physiological function of the organs involved. And when Jack's Packs are applied, it's amazing how fast things can turn around simply because they address the malnutrition we're suffering, we all are suffering from. You can get more information about that at forbiddendoctor.com, but also by calling the office, and Hannah is there, 801-523-1890. All right, I told you at the very beginning of the show, Planet X is back. And, and as far as what I do structurally to the spine, there's a lady coming in today with just knife-stabbing pain in her head with no history of it. And my first impression, of course, is brain tumor, because that's a lot of how a brain tumor will come on, except she has all the classic signs of spinal misalignment. So I'm going to get pictures and work on her today, and if that knife-stabbing pain that she's describing as a migraine, and she's never had a migraine before, so that's the only verbiage she has to describe what's going on. If that knife-stabbing pain isn't gone in 24 hours, I'm going to suggest a brain scan. But usually, migraines can be settled wonderfully well in less than 24 hours. And so that's a new patient that I have today among all the other people I'll be seeing. So I'm looking forward to that. You can have a consultation with me for up to 30 minutes at no charge. Just call the office, 801-523-1890, and schedule a time when we can get together. And if it's not what you're looking for, we'll still be friends. You know, that's fine. I have a hard time keeping up with the business demand that I have right now. I just looked at the schedule. Today's incredible as far as being busy is concerned. And I saw a couple yesterday who drove in from Oregon. They come in a couple times a year, drive in from Oregon for care because they feel like they can't get it anywhere else. Again, that number is 801-523-1890. So now astronomers have found new evidence that a mysterious ninth planet might be, in their words, hiding out at the edge of our solar system, rewriting again what we know about the cosmos. So an international team from Taiwan, Japan, and Australia, over 40 years worth of data from 2 space probes to track down what they believe are signs of this distant planet that's moving around our sun. Now, if this distant planet stays out there beyond Pluto, orbiting around our sun, that's no problem. Now, Planet 9, or Planet X, as NASA is now calling it, first emerged as a real possibility back in 2016 when 2 astronomers from the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, presented evidence of a large gravitational force far beyond Neptune. A large gravitational force. That's another way of saying a planet or a black hole. So this new study has whittled a list of 13 candidates down to just one potential object slowly moving around our sun, anywhere from 46 to 65 billion miles away. Now, of course, in the context of entanglement, it could be right next door, but that's for another show. So put that in perspective. This new planet at the outer rim of the solar system could be almost 20 times further away from the sun than Pluto is. And Pluto, which infamously lost its status as the 9th planet back in 2006, is less than 4 billion miles from the sun. Sitting in the Kuiper Belt is a region in our solar system beyond Neptune that's filled with icy objects and comets and dwarf planets like Pluto. Dwarf planets don't get much attention because they're not big gravitational sources. Since this hidden planet may not be so far away, the new study theorizes that it's likely an ice giant like Uranus or Neptune. Now, as you know, it takes the Earth 365 days to orbit the sun. Mercury only takes 88 days. Venus takes 225 days. Mars takes almost twice as much as the United States, as Earth, 687 days. Jupiter takes 12 years to orbit the sun, which is why every year Jupiter slowly moves into a new sign of the zodiac, of which there are 12 signs. And every 12 years, it has gone all the way through the ecliptic one time. Saturn, almost 3 times as Jupiter, takes 32 years to get around the sun. So if you are a backyard amateur astronomer like myself, whenever you can locate where Saturn is, it seems like it's always there. It moves a little bit, but not much. Uranus takes 84 years. Neptune takes 165 years to go around the sun once. And these things are moving swiftly. But Planet X, they're saying, is out there so far it could take anywhere from 10 to 20,000 years. I mean, that's an ice age. That's almost 2 ice ages before it orbits the sun. Now, under those circumstances, the only possibility of life would likely make it what scientists refer to as an extremophile, which are microbes that can survive and thrive in incredibly harsh conditions, where most life forms, of course, would die. So these conditions might include very high or very low temperatures, like boiling ice hot springs, or like icy Antarctic waters that exist in the Antarctic. High pressure deep in the ocean, extreme acidity, high radiation levels, whatever. So on Earth, these kinds of bacteria live in near underwater volcanic vents, icy glaciers at the South Pole, and even in Chile's lifeless Atacama desert. So on Planet 9, they say the conditions would arguably be even worse. The study on the, still on the waiting peer review, found that Planet 9 is so far away from the sun that the surface temperatures would be somewhere between 364 and 400 degrees below zero. And based on the gravitational pull, scientists believe this distant world would have a mass of about 17 Earths, making it the size of Uranus or Neptune. So it's so far away from the sun that sunlight would be extremely weak. So while life may be questionable, scientists are getting close to determining its orbit. Now, there are these big radio telescopes that are scanning the entire sky to catch the infrared signals from distant objects. However, the key was this 23-year gap between observations that let astronomers look for something moving slowly across the sky. And when they started comparing the database of these different radio telescopes, they found that there are space bodies out there that were traveling about 3 arc-minutes per year. Now, as opposed to the stars behind them that essentially aren't moving in any noticeable way. And an arc-minute is used by scientists to measure angles in the sky, like how far apart things appear when you look up. And there are 60 arc-minutes in a degree, and there are 360 degrees, of course, in a full circle. So for comparison, the full moon is about 30 arc-minutes wide in the sky, just roughly 1/3 of a degree, about the size of a small coin held at arm's length, which is a way to describe the tiny movements. Now, based on a 2016 study, Planet 9, anywhere from 46 to 65 billion miles away, astronomers started looking for objects orbiting the sun within this 3 arc-minute range. And 3 arc-minutes per year would be roughly the width of a dime seen from 2 miles away. So just imagine you are at I-15 in the Spaghetti Bowl. And let's say 2 miles to the east would be Wasatch Boulevard. And somebody over there is holding up a dime between their thumb and finger. And you're looking with a telescope, powerful enough to see it, from the Spaghetti Bowl there on I-15 and 215. How much of the sky would that dime represent? Well, we have instruments now that can detect that little bit of measurement. And so while scientists are trying to confirm its existence, NASA says we've already proven this is an ice giant that would explain several mysteries of the solar system, because there are planets that act a little strange when they get to a certain area in the sky. In fact, this is how Pluto was discovered from the observatory there in Flagstaff. That perturbations, movements of a planet in the sky that we've known about for thousands of years. The Arabs were the first to really chart these things out. You imagine how dark the sky must be in the Arabian desert. And so they would follow these things, and they called them planets, which in Arabic means wanderer. But every now and then, with radio telescope observation, some of the more distant planets act a little bit strange in their movement, which theoretically can only be affected by a deeper, stronger gravitational pull. So when they try to find this larger planet at the rim of the solar system, would explain why objects in the Kuiper belt, these other ice bodies, are tilted about 20 degrees with respect to the plane that the planets sit on, and they orbit the sun. In other words, what causes them to lean? Now, I have this little tiny succulent plant in the window of room number 1, treatment room number 1, that was given to me by a patient. And it has just exploded out of the ground. And I've been having the most interesting little experimentation with it because it keeps leaning towards the sunlight. And so I will turn the plant 180 degrees so that it's leaning in towards the room, and in a short period of time, it has started leaning again out towards the sunlight. So if I did not understand the relationship between plants wanting exposure to the sun, I might come up with some crazy explanation as to why that's happening. But because of agronomy science, we know exactly what's happening. The plant has the ability, the intelligence, to find the source of its life and will lean towards it. When you're looking at these things out there in the Kuiper belt and they're tipping, pointing in a direction that's different than the planets that are out there that are already giant ice giants, Uranus and Neptune, what are they pointing to? Well, we can see where this stuff comes from. Because of the strong gravitational pull, this explains why all these comets, tiny dwarf planets like Pluto, cluster together and move in the same direction without floating away out into losing its connection with the sun and just floating out namelessly beyond the orbits of the solar system into space itself. I hope that was informative. But they say that if Planet 9 exists, it's because of this great gravitational pull that it was discovered. Okay, that will do it. I'll be back tomorrow with a health show. I wanted to mention that. I wanted to mention that to the K-Talk listeners, but they've already gone to news. So those of you who are listening on the stream, thank you again. It's gone black. I don't know why. I hope what I had to say was informative and interesting to you. I will be back tomorrow with a bit of a health show, and I want to talk about the recent comments of David Martin regarding bioweapons development and the vindication of Bhattacharya, now in charge of the NIH, and maybe some of the stuff regarding Casey Means and the controversy about her becoming the American Surgeon General. So I'm going to end the stream. I greatly appreciate your being a part of the program.